Hey, Master Gardener trainees. This is Pesticides 101. Basically, what we're going to do in this module is we're going to talk about the very basics of pesticides. We're going to talk a little bit about labeling and what you should be looking for so that you can help the homeowners and also help yourself on a variety of things. And we're going to introduce, just kind of barely touch on the concept of integrated pest management, or IPM. So I oftentimes like to start out this particular type of material by asking folks what is their definition of a pesticide. Most people right off the bat want to first go to saying it's the application of chemicals. Well, yes and no, because remember, even water is a chemical, but you wouldn't necessarily be using that as a pesticide. Fertilizers are chemicals. You wouldn't be using those as pesticides. There are a wide variety of things, even worm castings, folks. Those are made out of chemicals, and you wouldn't be using those as pesticides. So more specifically, for our purpose, a pesticide is anything, and there are a wide variety of them, from insecticides, fungicides, miticides. You see how very specific each different category is, but they're anything at all that is used to kill something else. So even soapy water, soapy dishwater could be used as a pesticide. Very low toxicity, quite effective, and one that we often recommend, but that's used to kill something. So that is called a pesticide. So it can be absolutely anything, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing either. So let's make sure that we keep everything in context and perspective as we go throughout this particular module. So why do we then need pesticides? I usually say, what is a pesticide? And then I ask, why do we need a pesticide? Well, they're obvious. I mean, you think about our crops. There's a lot of things that like to eat on them. There's a Woody Allen quote out there, and I am nowhere near quoting it exact here, but it says something like, your garden is a smorgasbord and everything wants to eat it. And I think it's a very good way of putting it. Whether we're trying to cultivate it and grow it for crops or for ornamentals, whatever it may be, there's something out there that wants to eat it. Same thing goes with our native plants that we might not be cultivating for any other purpose, but planting and landscaping and ornamentals. There is always something out there that wants to eat it. So we need pesticides to enable us to get past very damaging high levels of pests, whether that be fungal invasion, bacterial, nematodes, insects, mites. There's a lot of different reasons why, but most people, I think, and if you look at these two kind of older but very, very common, we still see these advertisements out here, Raid, bugs, kills them dead. Or Raid kills them all. I mean, how much deader do you have to be than dead, right? And why do we have to kill them all? Is it really necessary? And I think because of this advertising and these ideas, very antiquated ideas, a lot of people feel that, number one, they just got to do something in their landscape. Well, I saw a bug, I got to do something. I saw a spot on a leaf, I got to do something. Or maybe it's just I saw the Joneses doing it and decided I needed to as well, right? Doesn't always mean that we need to, and we might be doing more harm than good by applying pesticides. I think some people also have the concept that the only good bug is a dead bug, and we know for sure that is not true whatsoever. There are plenty of quote-unquote good bugs out there that keep the bad bugs under control, but all of them, even a mosquito, let's get honest here, we don't like them, and they can carry diseases. They kill more people than any other animal on the planet every year because of those diseases, but they still have a place in their environment. And our idea that we want to eradicate, meaning get rid of every single one of these specimens out there, is number one, not practical or feasible, but number two, not necessary, and upsets the food chain in every different direction and is an environmental hazard if you get right down to it. So this concept of good bugs or dead bugs is very antiquated and really gets in our way of letting the good guys, the biologicals, control the bad ones. We also have folks that just have their zero tolerance. I'm not going to allow one blemish. I'm not going to have one blade out of place whatsoever. And again, it's just not very feasible unless you're the Disneys of the world. And this applies to the weeds. It applies to the spots. It applies to, the cucumber that's got something eating on it. It applies to so many different types of situations in the lawn, landscape, and garden. At one point in time, we had this concept of we wanted these ideal pesticides, and I think most people still have this idea today that it needs to absolutely kill everything, eliminate everything that's out there. I want it to kill fungi, I want it to kill bugs, I want it to kill rodents, I want it to kill everything. I want it to last forever, for years. I only want to put it out maybe one time. One treatment to cure all of the different ills that might come across, and I want just one date a year. I want to know this is the date I want to go out there, and timing shouldn't matter. I shouldn't have to worry about when it's going to rain. I shouldn't have to worry about if it's cold or if it's hot. Of course, that was the ideal concept at one point in time that led to the development of things like DDT. And the use of a lot of the inorganic chemicals, like the ones that have arsenic, the heavy metals, copper, leads, and all of those tend to stay for a long time in the environment. They persist. They have a lot of non-target damaging factors to them. They can have far-reaching implications that most time we have no idea until many years later that we've done damage with them to something completely unrelated. But there are some like DDT that were excellent. They killed everything. And it would last for a long time, and it took one application. They were incredibly effective. But because of that ideal insecticide concept or ideal pesticide, we created a lot of problems that some people probably anticipated and others didn't. The result of this widespread use, if you just think about the insecticides, for example, one category of pesticides, at one time, these ideal pesticides, these organophosphates and whatnot, we could get up to a 98% reduction from one application. Now, that was good. You talk about efficient. It's very efficient. It would be nice to sit there and go, yeah, I went out here, I made one application, and I got rid of pretty much almost every single one of those bugs that was causing me a problem. But at what cost? At what cost? And we didn't realize that for some time. Most people would go 98% reduction. It's a good thing. That's what Martha would tell us, right? But in actuality, we realized later on down the road that suddenly we were increasing the dosage because what we were using before wasn't working. We needed more applications than before. We started to have to switch insecticides. We started to see resistance in the pests that we had been applying these things to the point that we were left without very good insecticides. We've got a very similar situation with our antibiotic resistance in human health. Today, we exposed over time these organisms to things they didn't need to be exposed to, especially in high amounts, and they evolved. These are living things. They have DNA, they have the ability to evolve and adapt, and they do it quickly because their lifespan is very quick. Their cycle is very quick compared to something like us, where we have decades before we're able to reproduce in most all cases. So we created these monsters, if you will, and it was not a good thing. And this is just a handful of the reasons why we ended up with some really bad repercussions. We found ourselves on a pesticide treadmill, if you will, to where we were increasing rates of pesticides in the number of applications. We were having these secondary pest outbreaks because you'd have this pest resurgent because we wouldn't use the pesticide correctly, too little or too infrequently, and we would start to see this exponential increase in the pest population because we were misusing it. Then we would have all of those interactions between the good bugs, the bad bugs, and more bad bugs thrown off from their natural cycles, and we had secondary pest outbreaks, a lot of pesticide resistance, and a lot of toxic residues left behind, especially a lot of heavy metals. Even to this day, we still have areas that are toxic because of pesticide applications done many, many decades ago that were inappropriate. At the time, they didn't realize that, but they were inappropriate, and it really cost us environmentally. It really was not until the 1970s to when folks really started to set up and say something's got to be done. We've got a major problem on our hands. We've got to get off the pesticide treadmill. This was really the result of Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring that came out in '62. If you haven't read that, I would highly suggest it. It was well ahead of its time, and it hit these problems nail right on the head. And it led to a lot of social pressure and social knowledge about something that nobody really ever put a lot of thought into. And it sparked a whole movement called environmentalism that is still working today in many ways. It ended up helping to ban DDT in 1972. It helped us get to the point where we require now applicator certifications. That's why we teach green industry best management practices. It restricted the use of many, many, many pesticides. And it also caused the USDA to adopt the concept of integrated pest management, which was a game changer and helped us start to get off of that treadmill. It also then really led by 1990 to the invention of our Florida-friendly landscaping principles, which we've gone over many, many times. We know we've got these 9 principles, and the one that makes the most sense for this module is the controlling of yard pests and garden, throw that in there too, responsibly, but every single one of these principles all relate back to environmentalism, especially where we're talking water conservation and preservation. Some of them are not so obvious, but that's definitely what they're designed for, and they sprung from that environmentalism pressure and a lot of the new laws and regulations from the 70s up to the 2000s. A lot of people, I think, when they look at just, say, insects, they go, ooh, wow, that's something that might hurt me, it might sting me. They're kind of scary, they're creepy crawly type things. Everybody, I think, has probably screamed at a bee flying by from one time or another. And they fail to remember that these are incredibly necessary organisms to us. They help pollinate our plants, both the natives and the cultivated. They help to turn and aerate the soil, and they provide biological controls. These are good bugs controlling the bad bugs, and sometimes we get in their way, and we target them by mistake with pesticides instead of letting them do their job because we don't know to look for them. We can't recognize them. We see all of them as bad bugs, and we don't do enough research. So a lot of times the good bugs are mistaken for bad bugs and targeted when they shouldn't be, and they should be left to do their own good work and get us off that treadmill. The organophosphates, there's so many different types of chemical categories that are out there, but the organophosphates, those are neurotransmitters. They basically affect the central nervous system of the insect, and it dies because of tumors. While toxicity to mammals varies quite a bit, it tends to be higher. Excuse me, that was unexpected. I hope it was not due to an organophosphate. But the toxicity tends to be higher than some of even the chlorinated hydrocarbons, and residual is days to weeks, so it does tend to stick around. It's effective against a wide range of insects, but because of that broad spectrum and how well this can work, and because of toxicity issues, a lot of these started to be banned from homeowner use, which I think is an excellent idea because generally the folks in the agricultural and commercial side of things have been trained. These are the folks that know how to use this stuff correctly and safely. It's the homeowners that are generally not trained, and that concept of a little is good, a lot is better, and Jim's moron approach comes into play here. So we've really started to peel some of these off of availability to homeowners because of the misuse and abuse and the level of sensitivity environmentally that we could have. Dursban, diazinon Even 7 fits into this group, and a lot of you probably use 7. It's very low toxicity in comparison and quite effective, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it come off of the market at some point down the road just because of the chemical nature of this product. So here are just some of the articles from early 2000s that refer to some of these coming off the market. So we do have pyrethroids. This is probably the most common family, big family, of insecticides that are available on the market. Now these are synthetic. Pyrethroid is synthetic, so man-made versions of pyrethrum. Now pyrethrum do come from plants, so think chrysanthemum. Okay, chrysanthemums are very well known to produce a pyrethrum that tastes really bad, smells pretty bad, and keeps critters from wanting to eat on the plants. So we learned to produce these in a laboratory cheaper and at a higher quality and in higher amounts to be used. So they're synthetic pyrethroids. They're nice because they're fast acting. They're active at very low concentrations. Some people are a little sensitive to them, but not generally considered to be serious toxins or anything. They, again, go after the central nervous system, so it pretty much just shuts the bug down. But I think the biggest issue with these is they're very broad spectrum. They're not selective, so even our good guys are easily targeted by the pyrethroids or any of the pesticides. Even soapy water, it doesn't take names and choose. It takes no prisoners. So what do you need to know about pesticide use and about selecting pesticides, and what can you be telling the public? Because you know we're not supposed to, as master gardeners or university agents, we don't endorse any kind of product, but what we do is research which of the active ingredients we can give in a recommendation, and we can tell folks to look for the active ingredients, but a lot of people go, where the heck is that, right? So it's all about the label. We need to understand the label and understand that even the very fine print is critical in our use of pesticides in any situation, especially for homeowners. There are lots of different pesticides to choose from on the shelf. All of them come in pretty colors. They have names like Bug Be Gone, Bug Stop, right? This really goes, oh, well, it must do something really good. The marketing is fantastic, even some that are labeled as safer. Makes you feel safer about using it and like you're doing something great for the environment, right? Doesn't matter what kind of name you give them, they're all still pesticides and have to be used properly and have to be used based on what the label says. If we are using that chemical in any way outside of its recommendation on the label, we are breaking federal law every time. And we also cause ourselves to have a lot of pain in the wallet and pain from an environmental standpoint. And if we're not following the label, we can go to jail and we can have some heavy fines for that, even the homeowners. So, reading the label is critical, and explaining this to the homeowner is very important. There's so many things right there on the front of the label that's important, but what I always tell folks is to make sure you read the label before you buy the item. Make sure you're getting the right thing. Read it again before you mix it and before you apply it. Read it again before you store it, and read it again before you try to dispose of it. Because every one of them has a little bit of a different way of handling, mixing, applying, storing, disposing, and how it can be used or should be used. And I always suggest that people ensure those labels don't get removed, don't get wet, don't get smeared, that they are able to hold on to those. And it is the law that we have those labels with the bottle that they're associated with. Even if we dilute a particular product, we have to have it labeled correctly as well. So let's look at a few examples here of how easy it can be to start reading the labels. We're looking for very specific things and not the brand name. That's not what we're concerned with. This one here, you can see it says soil and turf insect killer granules. Okay, well, that's pretty specific. Insects, but it's not incredibly specific because I don't know exactly which ones. There's a few different pictures on there. Same thing with this liquid, insect killer. A lot of different pictures, but I need to read the label to know for sure which ones it's going to kill and if that's the one I need targeted. How do I know what bug I need to kill unless I know for sure I've 1, got a bug, 2, that it's a bad bug, and 3, that it's doing damage, and 4, I need to be able to identify it accurately before I can select an active ingredient and a product. Here you see this wettable powder. It tells us a whole lot about this particular product. It controls mites on fruits, veggies, flowers, ornamentals, lawns. That's a lot. And it's incredibly specific because it says mites. It doesn't say insects. It doesn't say fungi whatsoever. Okay? Mites, if you recall, are not insects. They're more closely related to spiders, ticks, crabs, lobsters, because they have 8 legs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you compare that to a true, like the cricket with 6 legs, okay, there's a lot of difference here. And so a product labeled for insects is not going to take care of a mite problem, and what's labeled for mites is not going to take care of insects in most cases. So we have to be very specific at what we're looking for. One product does not do it all. We have walked away from that old antiquated concept of one product, one application, and wiping out everything, right? The goal is not to eliminate. That's not practical, and it's not good. The goal is to control below a threshold of damage that we are willing to accept, whether that be the number of blemishes on a fruit, spots on a leaf, or damage in a field of crops. So here again you see lawn and ornamental and vegetable fungicide. So we know this is very specific, a fungicide to kill fungal infections, not insects, not bacteria, not weeds. And this one is very specific for slug and snail bait. It controls slugs and snails. So why in the heck would I go out here and try to use this on insects or try to use this on weeds? But believe you me, people will try it. Now this one's interesting, and I want to spend just a few minutes talking about this. This is a broadleaf herbicide here. Doesn't matter. Trade name doesn't matter whatsoever. Broadleaf herbicide. So broadleaf, we know if you go back to your weeds, is not the same as a sedge, and broadleaves are not the same as your grasses, right? So we've got 3 different types of weeds, okay? Sedges, we've got our grassy weeds and our broadleaf weeds. So this says it controls broadleaf specifically, okay? So that's good. We're looking at broadleaf herbicides. Others like Roundup may be much more generic and much more broad spectrum, where to pretty much kill anything that it touches, and like cleanup, grass and weed killer. But let's take just a little bit of a closer look at this broadleaf herbicide here, just the front label alone. Pull that up. It reads here that this is for turf and ornamental, southern grasses. Okay, that's good. Bermuda grass, we might have that. Zoysia grass, we might have that. And St. Augustine grass, okay, that's good. So let's say I'm just like every other homeowner out here. I've got Floratam St. Augustine grass, the most common St. Augustine grass that's out there. Sounds good. What I am interested in here, let's see if I can get my pen to show up. I'm interested right here in this active ingredient. Hopefully you can see my pen. I'm not sure. Let's see if I can do this better. I'm interested right here in my active ingredient. Well, that didn't work too awful well, did it? But that's what I'm interested in, okay? So I see that this is salts. I know this is going to possibly burn, so I got to be careful with it. Great, but it's labeled for St. Augustine grass, so I'm good. I'm good to go. So don't worry too terribly about it. I feel like I'm covered, but now, if I were to look at the very, very fine print on the inside of the label on the back, which is what most people do not look at, I'm going to see very fine print how much to use and where. So let me look at this. Now, what if I was the typical homeowner and I missed this? Okay, look here where it says St. Augustine grass and centipede grass. If I were smart and I read the whole way through, I would see where it says do not apply to Floratam St. Augustine grass. But it's labeled for St. Augustine grass. But this product is not acceptable for use on Floratam. On the other cultivars, yes. A little tricky, I admit. But if we were not reading this label correctly and I applied this to my Floratam, you bet I've just killed every bit of my Floratam. Even take a little bit of a closer look and you'll see it says do not make applications when temperature is below 50, not usually an issue, or above 90, or expected to be within 72 hours. How many days a year do you get when we're not hitting 90 or expected to within 72 hours of an application? There's two good reasons here that I probably don't want to use this on any of my St. Augustine grass, regardless of the cultivar. So very close inspection of the fine print in the very back, buried in the label, would tell me this product's not for me, even though that front label tells me it probably is. So these are very important concepts to keep in mind for ourselves and for the homeowners. And like I mentioned to you, any use outside of the stated purpose of that pesticide and how we're handling it is a violation of federal law. And that's very serious, punishable by going to jail and by fines, loss of license if you're in the commercial sector, loss of your job, and environmental issues at the same time, and it can be very costly on the wallet. What we mean by use, it includes the handling, the mixing, loading, storage, transportation, disposal, environmental exposure. So if that label was to say you cannot transport this inside of the cab of a truck and you do it, that's outside of federal law. If it says you must wear neoprene gloves and you don't, that's outside of federal law. You always can do more than what is required of you by the law, but you can never do less than what that label states. So proper chemical application then starts by using the lowest rate that's listed on the label as being effective, never using higher rates, never applying it more frequently than is on the label, mixing it, measuring it properly, only using it as needed, not routinely, because we're going to cause environmental problems and resistance, and avoiding the blanket applications, going for spot treatment. We found that that's equally effective, especially with the weeds and even some of the diseases. And remember, and what we try to get homeowners to focus in on is that the label is the law. That is what we have to abide by. The other concepts that I want to talk a little bit about is going with the soft pesticides first. I'm not a real fan of the use of the term soft because it might imply that they're not potentially dangerous. It might imply that they're not very effective, and that's not the case at all. They're just not as toxic in most situations compared to the others on up the scale. They're really good for spot treatments. They basically are things like soapy water, even neem oil, BT, all of those fit over into that soft concept. Oils, horticultural oils. Usually, you want to be as selective as possible. Some of these are a little bit more selective than others, but most of them are still going to even hurt our biologicals if we're not careful, our good guys. And you can even get some phytotoxicity or burn. You can get some damage from the use of soft pesticides. Remember, they're designed to kill. So even soapy water can burn your plants if you're not using it correctly. Insecticidal soaps, there's a lot of them that are on the market. Basically what they do is they break down the cuticle that's on the exoskeleton of the insect. So it's a contact toxicity only that leaves no residues behind. It's really effective on the soft-bodied insects. But it can burn the plants, especially during the heat of the day, so I use them really, really early or really, really late in the day. But they're quite effective, and on a scale of toxicity, very low toxicity, very low in terms of residuals. There's just nothing that's left behind. These break down really quick. So soapy water is a good example of an insecticidal soap, and any of them that you can purchase out there on the market. Horticultural oils, not used so much anymore. They do have a potential to burn, especially if it's 80, 85 degrees or higher. But it's not really toxic or anything, no residue left behind. But it coats the surface and suffocates the insect is basically what happens. Insects don't have respiratory systems like we do. There's no lungs, there's no gills. They have holes or spiracles all over their bodies where air is exchanged. And so if those are coated and plugged up, they smother. BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, a very good biological control. There's a lot of different varieties of it. which just means basically subspecies of the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis. It doesn't hurt plants. It doesn't hurt us in any way whatsoever. But it is a bacterium that, when digested by things like very young caterpillars, disrupts their digestive system and causes them to die. It's not very effective on any of the older insects, older caterpillars, but very effective on the young guys if you're scouting. And you see these short residual in the environment. It's usually in the form of a dust or a powder. Very easy to use, very effective, and one of the better ones that I highly recommend on the soft pesticides. And then neem oil. Neem, a lot of people think they can just toss it around, but it is a pesticide naturally produced by the neem tree native to India. It's broad spectrum though, so this can wipe out a lot of our good guys, but it's active on contact, and it can cause some phytotoxicity, some burn, especially when we've got high temperatures on our plants. So, a lot of people think that, oh, it's neem, it's completely safe and whatsoever. It's still a pesticide. It's still a toxin designed to kill. So keep that in mind. And it can cause some damage if we're not careful. So when it comes down to getting the most out of your pest control efforts, we do want to consider the use of pesticides, chemical pesticides, when necessary. But we also want to make sure that we don't get back onto that pesticide treadmill from many years ago, because we want to consider other management tactics like cultural controls, biological controls, all of these integrated in with the use of chemicals, starting with the lowest toxicity first and working our way up only if it's necessary, and packaging all of that into what's called an integrated pest management approach, or an IPM. And this started back in the 70s and 80s with the USDA of trying to find a way to get off of the pesticide treadmill. We know from a cultural standpoint that plants that are healthy are less stressed. And when they're less stressed, they have less opportunity to get infections and to have pests that will actually bother them and cause problems. And this starts with putting the right plant in the right place. Proper fertilization with the right amounts, the right products, the right times. Proper irrigation. Most of the time we're watering way too much and causing a lot of problems. Proper pruning to get rid of dead, diseased tissue, and not so much just to try to control the height or the spread of plants. Sanitation, sanitizing not only our equipment from one plant to the next, or one lawn to the next, but also getting rid of diseased fruit, leaves, broken, damaged tissue. Getting that away from our desirable plants will help prevent the spread of a lot of diseases and insects and weeds at the same time. There are many, many reasons for pesticides to fail, and some of those are just because we chose the wrong pesticide, we didn't apply it correctly, wrong dosage, wrong timing for applications. The pests are resistant to the pesticide, which happens more and more frequently. But the number one reason that a pesticide fails, even in an IPM, is because we did not correctly identify the pest. If we did not identify the pest and tie it to the damage, how can we then begin to effectively try to control it? I didn't say eradicate, I said control it. So there's lots of different things that people will do out there, from not putting out the chemical in the right way. I mean, here's a good example of a granular that's supposed to be used as a systemic that needs to be taken up by the roots of the plant. So why'd they put it on the leaves? I mean, this is just crazy. It's a total waste of money and putting chemicals into the environment when it wasn't necessary. Could even burn that plant, actually. And also think about the fact that a lot of the insects and stuff we're trying to get to are on the underside of the leaf. They got a built-in umbrella right here, a natural umbrella, so they're being protected. Most insecticides kill on contact, so we need to get the insecticide to the bug in the right place, or get it onto the fungus or into the plant. So improper application is very common, right behind misidentification of the pest itself. Of course, incorrect timing. There are so many instances of this where folks will say, oh, I've got these weeds out here. The product is labeled for, say, my St. Augustine grass. Didn't read the label correctly where it said don't apply it above 85 degrees, and I did it anyway, and I killed all my St. Augustine grass, but I've got my weeds left behind. So here's a very, very good example of just incorrect timing of application that, one, didn't work, but two, did more damage to our desired plants. Incorrect timing of application is also a big consideration when it comes to fungicides. Fungicides do not cure disease. Once that fruit or that leaf has the spot, has the lesion on it, whatever it may be, we're not going to cure that. All we're going to do with fungicides is, number one, prevent. And we're going to talk more about this in plant pathology, all of these IPM concepts. We're looking to prevent disease with fungicides and also prevent it from spreading to other plants or other portions of a plant. So we're not going to cure. These are absolutely preventative and not curative types of treatments in that fungal kingdom. Incorrect timing of applications. I mean, you see here weeds. Many people are trying to control weeds at the completely wrong time of the year. Rust mites, leaf miners over here. We need to be targeting certain parts of the life cycle of the insect or the weed or the pest to have the best chance at getting to it. You know, most insects, for example, are going to be most susceptible as nymph stage, larval stages, young stages. Weeds may be more susceptible in a seed stage. So it's going to vary, and we need to do a little bit of research and read the label. But really, it comes down to proper identification. Sometimes that can be done macroscopically if you see a weed out here or a chinch bug, but sometimes it comes down to microscopic examination, looking for signs of, say, fungal diseases. We're looking for the mycelium, the spores, the body of the fungus to tell us that it's there, and we have to associate it with the symptoms. So signs and symptoms for disease, and definitely seeing the insects and seeing damage tells us if there's a problem. Just because you see a fungus or just because you see an insect doesn't mean it's causing a problem. We need to keep that in mind as well. And that goes back to that old way of thinking. A good bug's a dead bug. You know, one or two bugs here or there, even if it's a chinch bug, doesn't necessarily mean it's doing damage or it hasn't hit our threshold for control yet. Monitoring is very important, though. You need to spend time just taking a quick glance over your plants, looking for any problems that might be popping up, and going, I see one or two aphids here or there today. I'm not going to do anything about it. I'll walk out there and see a few thousand. I might need to do something about it pretty quick. So monitoring and scouting to know what's normal, what's not, what was there last week, what's not there now, and vice versa is really important in helping us determine what control measures we need to take and when we need to take them. It's important to also know the life cycle of insects, because sometimes, like this orange dog caterpillar, I mean, he can do a number on plants like citrus, can just strip them down to hardly nothing. And as long as he's not doing a terrible amount of damage that's going to kill the plant, we might be okay with leaving him, because we know as master gardeners that that's the larval stage of our native swallowtail butterfly, and we don't want him going anywhere. So we have to set those thresholds to say, I know who this is, I'm willing to accept this level of damage because I want to keep these butterflies around, or is it causing so much damage on my citrus I got to do something about it. So not being able to recognize different stages of life in insects can be one of the biggest reasons that we don't have very good, effective pest control at the same time. And like it says here, it can lead to a little bit of heartache when you realize you've been killing something that is otherwise very beneficial. The good thing, and what I'm hoping to get most people to understand, is that less than 1% of all insects in the world, and there are billions, less than 1% are pests on us, livestock, and our plants. More than 99% of all insects are either beneficial or have no good, no bad, anything impacts whatsoever. So if you think about the one roach that runs through the house on occasion and how horrible that can be, right? In the grand scheme of it all, that's nothing. There's so many more out there that are good compared to him. And he's maybe not something we need to be too heavily focused on trying to control. Now, an infestation is a little bit different, but one here or there is pretty normal. As I like to say, it's Florida. Florida's where bad things go to happen, right? So some of it's just a give and take. We frequently have people that call and, oh, I've got a snake in my yard. How do I get rid of it? Why do you want to get rid of it? Is it necessary? Is it hurting you? It's probably just passing through. Oh, there was a roach out in the mulch. Well, that's pretty normal. This is Florida, and some of those, most of them are just decomposers, not going to harm you one bit. Doesn't even want to come in the house. So understanding and recognizing that less than 1% of all insects are going to do us any sort of potential harm is very important. It helps us to kind of lower our expectations at the same time of what damage actually looks like and doesn't look like. We're very heavily marketed to in America, and we want to go out here and buy an apple or an orange with not a single blemish. You're not going to find that in your backyard fruit, and that doesn't mean that fruit is not just as good as what's on the grocery shelf. We're just not willing to pay for it. And so in many cases, there is nothing we need to be trying to control. We just need to be scouting and only do some type of pest control when absolutely necessary. In many cases, it's just not an issue. It's all about our expectations. So we're looking to help homeowners choose the pesticides with the right active ingredient. We're not concerned with making any kind of recommendations on product names, brand names, but the active ingredient specifically targeting the pest we need to manage on the plant we need to manage. And we can easily find this information by Googling that pest and that plant with IFAS or EDIS publications and fact sheets. I can promise you we've seen it before if you're seeing it, and that information is very easily accessible to give to the homeowner. So lots of questions obviously about issues with turf that comes in, and if you stop and look at all of these, you might say, well, I'm not quite sure. All these kind of look alike at first glance. Do you see any patterns in there? Some are more irregular on the margins than others. Not quite sure. Now, what if I was to rush to judgment and run out there and put a pesticide out for every one of these problems? I might be polluting, especially when you take into consideration that first one's just poor irrigation coverage. There's no pest whatsoever there. Second one, chinch bug damage, then large patch disease over there. What if I put out a fungicide where there's chinch bug damage? Am I going to get any kind of effective control? No, and I've wasted my time, I've wasted my money, and I put out chemicals needlessly. Take a look at the bottom line. Take all root rot, that's a fungal infection that really has no good fungicide control. It's all about water management and fertilizer management. Look, dog urine. I'm not going to do any good whatsoever with pesticides on that. And nematodes. What if I thought that was disease and treated that with a fungicide? Am I going to get any kind of effectiveness? Absolutely not. I need a nematicide to control that kind of problem. Take a look here. What's wrong with this St. Augustine grass lawn? Take a close look. Do you see a pattern? What would you recommend? Maybe I actually need to do some diagnostic testing. Maybe I need to look at this and take right along the margin between the good and the bad grass about a square foot of turf. I need some good stuff and I need some bad stuff. I don't need the dead stuff. I don't want this dead stuff down in here. Dead grass doesn't talk to me. It's this stuff right along the margin between the good and the bad is what I need. That's where I'm going to find signs and where I'm going to find symptoms if I'm dealing with an insect issue or a disease issue whatsoever. This just so happened to be take all root rot compared to that chinch bug damage. Looks a lot alike. And if I made the wrong diagnosis because I didn't choose the right pest there, I could do a lot of environmental harm, and I could do a lot of harm to my wallet at the same time. All of this really boils down to trying to reduce non-point source pollution. Non-point source pollution, you can think of it as being a diffuse amalgamation of toxins and pollution coming from many, many different directions, oftentimes from home lawns, sometimes from agricultural properties, to be honest, not very often, because these are the folks that know how to use this stuff, from commercial properties, manufacturing plants and whatnot, a lot of different sources where it all pools together, and it's hard to differentiate where it's coming from to get it stopped. And because it's non-point source pollution, we know that we're all really a part of the problem. The good thing about that, though, is we can all be part of the solution, and especially when it comes to educating homeowners and how to use pesticides correctly, and fertilizers, and irrigation, but definitely with our pesticides for this. Pesticides move through the waterways just like fertilizers do, through runoff across the surface, and anywhere that it runs off of a lawn, if it runs off a roadway, it's eventually going to enter our drain system. It's going to enter retention ponds. It's going to enter into our lakes, our streams, our waterways, and eventually find its way out into the Gulf or into our aquifer down below, into our drinking water. So runoff across the surface is a major problem for pesticides, and so is leaching. And leaching is the movement of the pesticide down through the soil profile. Our sugar sands have no or little to no organic matter, so no ability to capture and hold any of these toxins up in the upper layers. And with a high water table like we have in Florida, these types of pesticides and chemicals enter into that waterway very, very quickly because of over-irrigation, heavy rains, and then, of course, runoff as well. So runoff and leaching are big problems when it comes to pesticide movement, especially in Florida with the way our karst system works. There are lots of different websites that are out there that can help you find more information on all of these topics. I hope that you will take some more time to look up IPM, to look up the Florida Friendly Principles. Always stay very familiarized with those. Ensure that we're not endorsing products, but we are looking for the pest, identifying the pest if there is one, and then making the recommendation for an active ingredient based on EDIS publications, fact sheets coming out from the university. It's very, very critical for us so that we're making, well, let's say we're not going to make any mistakes. Important concepts to go back and follow on, and all of them keep coming up from time to time through all the different modules, and I think you're starting to probably pick up on that by now, some major themes that are very common. So I hope you enjoyed this particular module, Pesticides 101, and I will see you again for the next.